if I answered the question.
No, actually it was a very good point, because it brought up this other issue which I think doesn't get enough attention. And Barry, you and I were talking about this earlier. According to JWT, the disposable income of the population of the Middle East, and by that they mean North Africa, the Middle East, and also South Asia, is $3 trillion. So they're actually not as poor as you think they are. And they are desperate for entertainment in a way. And obviously, Barry, you've had this enormous success in making these internationally, huge, very successful films that have translated into different cultures and different languages. And now it turns out you're crazy enough to actually make a movie about Muhammad. and I think I'm just curious, what is it? Is it something about the story, or is it the challenge, or is it the audience? What makes someone of your stature decide to possibly tackle something like this, a story like this? A story that, by the way, as I said, has a very, very large audience.
Well, I first became involved with, not Mohammed, but with the thought of doing a movie in the Middle East was when I was going to do The Alchemist with Lawrence Fishburne. Mm-hmm. And I spent a long time developing that with him. And ultimately, we put together all the money, but we ended up disagreeing on certain key things. And for that reason, we didn't make the movie. And hopefully that movie gets made someday, because that actually would be a movie that that was going to favorably portray the Middle East. And I loved the project very much, but it didn't happen, and that happens in our business. We worked for a long time. I raised, we were going to make that movie for $100 million, and we raised had the money to do it. We just had a very basic creative difference, and therefore the movie fell apart for me anyway. But fortunately, over the several years I worked on it, I had gone to the Mideast both to find locations and to find backing and support for the project, and made a lot of friends in Dubai and Abu Dhabi and in Jordan, and became intrigued by the region, which I knew very little about prior to that, and probably was guilty of all the stereotypical understanding of the Mideast that most people from America suffer from. And I think what happened more recently, somebody that I met while we were doing looking at doing The Alchemist from Dubai, who's actually a South African production guy, was approached to be involved with Mohammed by Ahmed Al-Hashemi from Qatar, who is a very courageous guy and has access to a lot of money, who wants to do...
The Qatari Foundation, correct?
Yes. Well, he's Al Noor Holding, and Al Noor,
yes, Al Noor.
And comes from the Al-Hashemi family, has, as many of the different learning Arab families, has relationships throughout the region. And he's I'm happy to say I've met him and really liked him, but he approached me Tim had recommended me to him, and they had been planning the movie for over a year, and they reached out to me. And he reached out to a number of other producers, but we had a really good meeting in LA, who we first communicated by emails and by phone calls, but then we met in LA and we felt we could work together. And for me, thankfully, I happened to be listening to a program on NPR. I think it was Fresh. I think it was, well, it was one of the programs I listened to on NPR, and there are many good ones. And they were interviewing a woman named Karen, I'm going to forget her name.
Armstrong.
Yeah, thank you. And it was a book on her background and the books that she had, it was a program on her background and the books she had written and her spirituality. And I immediately heard, when I heard that she had written a book on both Islam and another book on Muhammad, I went out and got the book immediately to figure out, I know nothing about Islam and I know nothing about Muhammad. Do I really want to be involved in this project? And when I read the book, I thought it convinced me that everything he stood for, I could be behind. I could understand what he was about, and his values and his morals and his principles were not dissimilar to what I believe in. And I thought it would be great to bring that understanding to the people that I know in the West, and to create a entertaining movie that tells that story. Now, it's certainly a challenge, but I think it's a challenge worth undertaking. And
this is what I want to push you on. Why is it worth undertaking? It's an amazing story, obviously, as you're right. You know, the possibility of doing good, I think, is inherent in the story, but it's also a pain in the ass, as you've already figured out. Why bother? Why not another Matrix? Why tackle something like this?
Well, you know, it's an interesting question, but I actually enjoy making pictures people say you can't make. People said we couldn't make Lord of the Rings in New Zealand. And Peter Jackson, they thought he was a filmmaker who had made a couple of these kind of horror films, and he had done a couple of films that got some notice, but they said, who's he to tackle this subject? No one can tackle this. How are they going to do all those visual effects in New Zealand? And I enjoyed that. I made a picture with, I made a couple of pictures with Coppola, who I admired quite a lot, and including Apocalypse Now, and certainly that was a film during the, you know, that people said we couldn't make.
So part of it is the challenge.
It's the challenge, and also I think it's a worthy challenge.
Yes.
It's a challenge that's worthwhile telling. And I think that, you know, even from the very beginning of the history of cinema, cinema became recognized as a medium that had tremendous, that manipulated the audience and could change points of view. And in fact, if you read, if you know anything about the history of cinema, it's the first person that developed modern filmmaking technique was an American named D.W. Griffith, but he did it sort of instinctually. And the Russians looked at what he was doing and said, you know, that would make great propaganda. And they started a film school, and a great Russian filmmaker, Sergei Eisenstadt, formulated what Griffith had done. And just the power of montage, just the power of juxtaposing two images. There's a great passage in his book, Film Form and Film Sense, where he says, he took a very famous Russian actor of the day, and he shot him close up, one expression, cut it into 3 pieces, took a bowl of soup and cut it in, took a family at a gravesite, cut it in, and took a little baby and cut it in, and asked the audience what they thought of this actor's performance, and they said, oh my God, what a great actor. When he saw the soup, you could tell how hungry he was, and when he saw the baby, how happy he was, and how sorry he was at the grave, and you get the understanding that cinema is a very powerful medium. And if you can, you know, it has to be, you have to entertain an audience, you have to attract an audience, you have to have a dramatic arc, but if you can harness that to bring about a change in the way people perceive other people in the world, I think you do something good. And I know from my own experiences, it was interesting, I was in the Army in Korea during Vietnam, thankfully, I was in Korea. And I was, because of Vietnam, I was a lieutenant, and I had a lieutenant colonel's job. And I was S2, S3 for a while of an engineer group. And I also had I was what they called the Cold War officer as well, which was, the Army realized back then, and they haven't done a really good job of dealing with this, but they realized that they had all these US soldiers there, young 18, 20-year-old kids, thrown into a foreign culture. And what you realize is these kids are, they don't have any sense that these this society they're in has any values, or that these people are people, that they're others, they're outsiders, and they don't have the same worth as they do. And that's an awful way to view the world, but it's typical. And it's typical of every society.